Good evening, and welcome to a special edition of Conversations Live, A Time to Heal. I'm Carolyn Donaldson, your host this evening. We've just seen a powerful documentary produced by WPSU on the impact of the Vietnam War on the lives of Pennsylvanians, those that served in Vietnam, protested against the war on the Penn State campus, or family members that prayed for their loved ones to return home safely. The costs of the Vietnam War were staggering just in terms of the number of Americans and Vietnamese who lost their lives. More than 58,000 Americans and over 2 million Vietnamese. The Vietnam War also divided our society like no other conflict since the Civil War. And while the war officially ended with the fall of the South Vietnamese government in 1975, the lingering effects are still felt today. Our producing team began their production process seeking the answer to two fundamental questions. Is now the time to talk about that national tragedy? And by engaging in dialogue, can we begin the process of healing in our society and for ourselves? Tonight, our guests are closely linked to the making of A Time to Heal, featured in the documentary, or professionally engaged in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. We'll also be taking your questions about the making of the film, the impact of the Vietnam War on your lives, and resources for treating the impact of trauma. Here's our toll-free number. We ask for you to call at 1-800-543-8242. And our email address is connect@wpsu.org. You may also tweet your questions or comments using the hashtag WPSUConversations. We welcome your input. Now let's meet our first guest. Frank Christopher is an Academy Award-nominated filmmaker and the co-producer and co-writer of A Time to Heal. Lou Frank lives in the Camp Hill area and is a veteran of the Vietnam War, serving proudly in the United States Air Force in Vietnam from 1968 to 1969 as an air cargo specialist. As you remember, he's featured in tonight's documentary that you just saw. And Dr. Stephanie Fredman is a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Penn State's University Park campus. She studies the intersection of post-traumatic stress disorder and couple and family functioning. She spent the last 10 years dedicated to developing and testing a couple-based therapy for PTSD that is currently right now being rolled out nationally within the Veterans Administration. And she'll be with us throughout this entire hour for you to call in any questions that you have regarding clinical health therapy. Now, before we start our conversation, let's take another close look at a short clip from A Time to Heal that features some of our guests tonight explaining the reasons behind their decisions to support or oppose the war in Vietnam.
What was the attitude about service in your community or in your family?
Oh, very patriotic. Everybody had uncles, fathers, everybody had relatives that had been in World War II and Korea. So where I lived, I mean, it was just you went in the military because that's what everybody did in your family, and that's, tradition. You had to.
I remember thinking, I'm going to go be a medevac chopper pilot. I want to get into the Army, and I kind of wanted to see what I was made out of.
I wanted to understand how the country went from the patriotism and unity of World War II to the anger and division of Vietnam, and why some people felt so strongly against the war that they would risk jail time or exile to avoid serving.
America to me was highly moral, the land of opportunity, and the Vietnam War just seemed like an unjust war, something that our country should not be doing. So it was out of a sense of moral outrage that I got into the anti-war movement.
This is where we draw the line.
I was prepared at the time to go to Canada. I was so dead set against the war in Vietnam that I was going to go to Canada. And I was really worried because I had a very conservative father. I didn't want to abandon my family. I didn't want to go to Canada, but I did not want to go fight in a war that I didn't believe in.
Let's start the conversation. If you want to join tonight's conversation, again, there you see the toll-free number, 1-800-543-8242. Again, our email address, if you feel more comfortable calling us that way and connecting with us, it's connect@wpsu.org. And you can also tweet your questions or comments using the hashtag WPSU Conversations. We'll be watching all of those. But let's start, if we can, with kind of maybe the brains behind this Time to Heal documentary. Frank, you and your co-producer, Lindsay Whistle-Fenton, give us an idea of why this film, why this narrower focus when we're looking at this very divisive time in history?
Certainly. First of all, I feel kind of alone here tonight because Lindsay can't be with us. And as you saw in the film, she's such a central part of the success that we have with this film in terms of building trust with people like Lou and other people we'll see tonight, that sense of empathy. And one of the things that we decided right at the beginning was to break out of the kind of stereotype of people who, my generation, Lou's generation, who took positions, maybe were opposed to each other, but find somebody who came at it fresh, somebody who didn't have the information that wasn't because it wasn't provided in school about the war. And so she came at it without an agenda, where I might have sat down and argued with this man about his position or mine. She came in and built empathy. So that was really critical to, I think, creating a very human film, something that I think people in the audience can recognize quite well, that these are people, not just ideas being expressed, but about people's experience, and there's a great deal of trust built in. The reason, though, we did this project is because of Ken Burns' documentary series that starts Sunday night here on WPSU at 8 o'clock. And like other massive Ken Burns series, like the Second World War, public television generally takes the opportunity to focus locally on how they can tell that story, because his team will focus internationally, nationally, it'll be political, it'll be economic, historical, but it gives us an opportunity to connect to our community and tell the stories that are very, very coming right out of our neighbors, right out of our towns. And so we approached it that way about 2.5 years ago, but we also wanted to reach people not just on television, but on radio, in the web, through events in our community. And so we built what we call a cross-platform community engagement project. This is one platform, television. We have a 2-hour radio documentary about the music of the Vietnam War that's airing on WPSU FM, 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock on Saturday. We have an interactive website where we've already been taking people's letters and photographs and songs and putting them into an archive, a database on the website. So there's already a sense of living presence and it'll continue beyond this film. And on top of that, we're showing this film in various communities. We were in Altoona focusing on PTSD just last week. Last night, Lou and I were at the Army Heritage and Educational Center in Carlisle, reaching a different audience, a military audience. The culmination of all that we're doing is we're bringing the Vietnam War Memorial Traveling Wall to Penn State, right next to the studios here at WPSU, October 5th through the 8th. And that'll be the culmination where the president of the university will speak. We'll have an opportunity to educate students, and we'll be able to celebrate people who gave their lives or risked their lives, unlike what they experienced when they came back from the war.
That's wonderful. So many voices coming from so many different parts, and Lou, your story is phenomenal. We already have callers on the line, though, so if you would listen in. We have George from Kersey, so we want to get to as many callers as we can and intersperse our stories between them. So George from Kersey, you're on.
Yes, I just want to say these people are my heroes. They're pretty cool.
That's wonderful, George. And I think you're looking at one right now here, Lou Frank, and your story and your sharing of your story. Lou, you're shaking your head, but you, I hear more stories that didn't even make the documentary about your personal story, about how when it was time to leave Vietnam, you extended your stay. Let's go there and just share with us a little bit about that.
Normally we had a 12-month tour in the Air Force. I'm not really sure about the other branches. I think we were all supposed to be a year. I guess around the 8th month that I was there, I just felt like I hadn't done enough and I needed to do more. And so I just, I said, well, I want to stay 6 more months if I can. And they said, sure, that's great. We'd love to keep you here for 6 more. So I extended 6 months, and I did get to go home for Christmas in '68. And when I was home and told my dad why I was home, because they were expecting me home in February, and I told him what I did, and he said, you don't want to do that again. And he had some choice words, and I figured, okay, I guess I better not do it again. But I would have, if he hadn't said that, I probably would have.
Wow, very, very remarkable.
So one of the things that really strikes me about Lou and his story is I first met Lou as a reenactor of the Vietnam War in the Military Museum in Boalsburg. And I had no idea that the Vietnam War was being reenacted until and talking to someone like him. Usually the stereotype is that you just focus on people who are in combat, and you don't understand how such a majority of the people who served were supporting that.
Yes.
And
the majority, right, Lou? It was 75% were people just like you that were assisting those who were combating.
Yeah, I was air cargo, load and unload airplanes, and pretty much that's all we did. We worked 6 at night till 6 in the morning, and the way I got out of that was I found out that if I was on a mobility team, I would go to smaller bases that had like dirt runways, and the Army and Marines didn't really have air cargo people. So we would go for 2 days to 2 weeks, depending on their requirement, and just load and unload airplanes. And the best part about it was, like, the airplanes didn't come like every couple minutes. We weren't like constantly working. We had time to sit down and just kind of sit around. Sure. So when the reenacting thing, when I met the guys that were reenacting, I said, well, I'd like to reenact myself as an airman in Vietnam with the unit is 1st Cavalry Division. And they said, yeah, that'd be great. What did you do? And I said, well, since we won't have any airplanes, I won't do anything because I don't have to do any work.
There you go.
So I figured that was,
That's a good reenactment.
but the best part was I was able to just talk to other veterans.
Sure.
And of course they would tell me, are you sick? Didn't you have enough? You were in Vietnam. Didn't you have enough? And I said, no, because every time I put this uniform on, I'm 19 again. And I get to be with soldiers, and I'm 19. Yep. And that's the safest time of my life, when I had hundreds and thousands of soldiers all around me and Marines, and I didn't have to worry about carrying a rifle because they did that stuff.
That's great. Hey, Lou, we've got another call. Let's get to Douglas from Grays Woods. Douglas, your question or comment, sir?
Yeah, I don't know if Dr. Fredman wants to address the issue of moral injury, but today was good news for me because my therapist told me that after almost 30 years, I don't have to go to therapy anymore. I'm going to be discharged sometime in the next 6 months, hopefully. But anyway, I'm still dealing with moral injury much more than the psychological and physical damage that I suffered because of my tour of duty in Southeast Asia. But I was just curious, is it just about forgiving yourself? I mean, what is involved with, because I still, deep down I have a profound sense of ongoing emotional shame from, having just served my tour of duty. When I was anti-war. After I got in, I kind of was naive, but I developed a sense that there was something profoundly wrong about the war. And just the fact that I served my country doing something that I was morally opposed to doing really impacted me deeply, much more so than any of the psychological after blowback that came from my service. So I don't know if that was a good comment or question or what have you, but I would welcome any input from anybody there.
Yeah, thank you for calling in. I think this is something that a lot of people deal with, both those who've served in Vietnam, but also in other theaters. And just for other people watching and listening on, moral injury is sort of a term that we use to try to represent when people have engaged in behavior or maybe did not do something that they would have expected that somehow went against their moral code, and they're having a hard time reconciling how that action or inaction, as the case may be, fits with their value system and how to make sense of that. And one of the things that we try to address in therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapies, is to try to help people make sense of their own or other people's behaviors as they occurred at the time of the event. And sometimes what can happen is that people may do things in one context that they wouldn't do in another. Or sometimes if they witness something really horrific or they're and they freeze, they may then blame themselves. I was trained to shoot to kill, or I should throw myself on somebody else to protect them at all costs. And they have a hard time making sense of why they did something or didn't do something, because sometimes it's hard to look back and remember all the other things that were going on at the time. So for example, there could be a lot of situational constraints on what the person was able to do or not able to do at the time that could influence sort of the choices that were available to you. And so one of the paths to recovery is helping people be able to put the event back into its context and be able to see how they or other people were potentially constrained to behave in some way or another.
And Douglas, we applaud you for your coming forth tonight and sharing your story and your accolade of success too. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for calling in. We'll get to more questions, but I understand we're also streaming this, and we have a gentleman, Les from Hayward, California, who served with Lou and would like to say hello. Les, you're on?
Yeah. Yes, hello, Lou. I hope you can hear me, brother. I'm proud of you. You did a great job.
Thanks, Les. Oh, man, good to hear your voice again. We just spoke yesterday.
Wow.
You made us proud, and I sent emails to all of our guys that I had email addresses for, tell them about the show tonight, and you were going to be on. Hopefully everybody's watching.
Oh, I hope so, man.
So a shout out to who?
You brought me to tears, brother.
Oh, God. Oh, I love you, man.
Love you too.
I think John and oh, my God, I got to go up the line. John's in Texas.
Right.
Tom's in Alabama, Ron's in Massachusetts. We got Les in California, Ted in California.
Winkleman's in Stockton. I told them all to try to watch. Hopefully they are.
Oh man, that is super. Thanks, Les. Oh man.
It is.
Thank you for calling in. Let's.
Thank you for letting me talk. I love Lou to death. He's my brother, and I remember him the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh,
God.
That's that brotherhood. Stephanie, I know you were saying that that is something that you're seeing in your research too. That they work together, right? This is something that really helps.
We work together, loading airplanes. He left, I believe, right after January of '69. I think is when he left. His 12 months were up, and a couple of the other guys, Ron from Massachusetts, Ron Parsons, he actually spent the whole 18 months that I was there, and most of the other guys, they had gotten there like late '67 or like that, and then they were all leaving in '68. But yeah, we had 4 reunions: 2007, 8, 9, and 10, and we got together and just spent a week with each other and our wives and the 10 minutes, we hadn't seen each other for 39 years, and 10 minutes after we were together, it was like we had never split.
Yeah.
And our wives were like a bunch of high school girls that were best buddies too. Yeah. And we're hoping to have another get together next year. We're planning that already.
That's great.
Yeah, these guys are, oh my God.
Frank, what did you find as you were out interviewing these Pennsylvanians from these different service sectors and different walks of life and the different stories? I mean, are they similar to Lou's story, the folks that...
Well, everybody's unique, but there's a similar bond that Lou talks about. First of all, I would clarify that it was Lindsay doing all the interviewing.
Yes.
And that's why I think the film is so good. One of the things that I discovered in my own journey with this is that during the Vietnam War, I was in college, and I opposed the war as a student and resisted the draft. And like Howard Davidson in the film, I had landed immigrancy to go to Canada. My father was in Vietnam as an Army auditor in 67, 68. So we had the kind of division that you talked about at the beginning of the show, we had right in our family. And it was something, it took about 5 years for us to even talk to each other about that. And I heard him out. I don't think he listened to me though. So one of the things that I really wanted to do with this film was to meet someone like Lou and the other veterans and to let them know that we could talk after all these years. So the first time we called Lou just to do a pre-interview. We listened and listened, and eventually he started talking about, like a lot of veterans do, about what they learned from the war and maybe how it wasn't necessarily worth it in terms of political and the losses and all. And I asked him, I said, well, then maybe you can understand a person like myself who decided at the very beginning of that not to go because I didn't think it was worth it and I thought it was a tragedy that we were lied to. He said, no, I can't understand that because your country asked you to serve and you need to serve. You needed to serve. So I let it go. We came to his house, met his wife, Lorraine, beautiful woman, and we had, a whole day with him. And we interviewed him for about 3 or 4 hours. And whatever he wanted to say, we went there. And at the very end, I asked him again that same question, and you hear it at the end of the film. If you will respect me and understand why I did what I do, then I'll try to understand what you do and we can get along. So that was an amazing arc right there. But then what was really fun, in the post-production process, we needed Lou and other veterans to identify certain photographs. So he came up here to University Park and he says, you asked me all these questions for hours. I want to ask you questions. So we went out to lunch together and he grilled me. What made you make these decisions? And we looked at each other, at our different upbringings, our different constellations of family support and how that affected our paths and the way we did it. And we came to understand each other a lot better. And there are times when we still would disagree, but on the human side, we're the same people. And we still, can communicate despite the past. Of course, we're a lot younger now, so we wouldn't be having the energy to fight. But to me, that was the most important thing that I wanted to do, was to come to terms with not to lose my convictions, because I feel like Howard in the film, but to humanize the people that I was, I disagreed with, and for them to understand why I did that and to see me as a human being.
Powerful stories from all sides of this very explosive kind of discussion that we're having. Peter from Hollidaysburg is on the phone right now. Thank you so much for holding on, Peter. Your question or comment?
Yes, I just want to make sure that people really understand that the dying didn't end in 1975. I had many, many friends of mine went to Vietnam, including my brother, but he was lucky. He went to Long Binh, which is basically where the main offices and headquarters were, and it was far away from the real, the front lines. But I had many friends I hung out with, and many of them got into alcoholism and drugs. They died younger. They also had problems because of Agent Orange and stuff like that. I had friends that died from liver cancer and this Parkinson-like disease that killed them really quickly. And I have my friends right now that are suffering from it. And these are things because of the herbicides and things they caused. They were right next to them because they were like clearing out the foliage that was dead and stuff like that. And they're still dying. People are still dying and suffering from Vietnam. People have to understand this war isn't over yet. These people are still suffering and dying. I just want to let people know that the dying didn't stop in 75. It's going to keep going, and it's a horrible shame, and that's all I really want to say.
Well, Peter,
and my empathy for all these guys is horrible.
Peter, thank you so much for sharing that, and I see some comments on what Peter.
Yeah, Peter, I just want you to know that I actually have pictures of the aircraft that were spraying Agent Orange as they flew over my head. And I do have Agent Orange. I'm being treated for it. If you know anybody that has any kind of symptoms, tell them go to the VA. The VA will definitely give you some help and give you, you know, tell you the right thing to do so that you'll be able to be better. You know, there's a lot of us that are fortunate that we didn't get the cancers and the things like that, but we do have other issues like diabetes. I had a heart attack, and it's all related to the Agent Orange. So tell your buddies, get to the VA, because once you get in there and they start treating you for that stuff, I think they'll be better off.
Mm-hmm. Very powerful, powerful. And Stephanie, your work with the Veterans Administration, from your research and treatment of PTSD, you've seen dramatic improvements with what is being done to help Vietnam veterans.
Right. So on the psychological health side, there has been tremendous advances in the treatment of PTSD since the Vietnam veterans came back. So it was when the Vietnam veterans were coming back, we didn't have a diagnosis of PTSD. It was these, you know, tens and tens of thousands of veterans coming back that really kind of pushed the field forward to have the psychiatric community be able to come to consensus to have a shared label for what was going on. But that wasn't until 1980. Okay. And then for another couple of decades, the conventional wisdom was that PTSD is a chronic condition. You can't recover from it. And so the best we could do is offer sort of palliative care. How could we help you manage your symptoms, but this is something that you'll never get over. And kind of around the same time, there was work being done with civilians that showed that you could actually treat people to recovery in 10 to 12 sessions. And so starting in the early 2000s, people like Candace Monson at Ryerson University, and then Edna Foa at now University of Pennsylvania, were starting to use cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure, which had at that point only been used in civilians, and start to say, we want to be able to do better for veterans. Okay. And in fact, it was amazing that people who might have had this condition for decades were recovering and having large improvements in symptoms. And so now the VA has invested a lot of resources to be training people nationally all over the country to be able to offer these treatments. And basically what I say, it's never too late to recover from PTSD.
Okay. Powerful stories, and I want to thank so much again Frank Christopher and Lou Frank for joining us tonight. Now, Dr. Stephanie Fredman will stay with us as we look first at another clip of A Time to Heal to hear how our next guests have experienced and dealt with the impact of the Vietnam War.
My brother was Major Lewis P. Smith II. From Bellefonte. He was in the U.S. Air Force, and he was shot down over Laos on May 30th, 1968. I remember my mother walking into our living room, and she could see down to the main road, and she could see a gentleman in a uniform walking up the stairs. And she just screamed. At that point, everything in my household is starting to crumble around, and I pull within myself, and I'm like, am I going to get to go on my field trip tomorrow? And now I look back on that and feel so guilty. I look back now, and it was just a very, very hard time.
You probably didn't even understand kind of what...
Oh, I didn't. I didn't understand what was going on. It's like, okay, he went missing. You know, it's like, oh, he'll show up tomorrow. You know, it'll be fine. They'll find him. And as the hours went into days, and the days went into weeks, and it went into months, and it went into years, and it wasn't until I had my son, and we were out shopping, and he went missing from me. It was probably 30 seconds. Your entire life stops when your child is missing. That's when it clicked. What my mother had been going through for all those years. It's the not knowing.
You unload these troops and you wipe down the inside of the chopper. And you take off, and maybe you go to refuel, and then you go back into that hellhole. There's where the fear is. My brain is begging me, don't go back there, don't go back there. You know, it's just screaming in your ears, don't go back, don't go back. But you got to. You know, I would think of those grunts and stuff, and I think, man, that could be me down there, you know. I got to go in. But you get out of there and you get into clear air, then you start hearing what's going on in the back. And that's the heartbreaking stuff there that I can't wipe out of my head. I mean, I started hearing guys screaming, oh God, or mommy. The louder they're screaming back there, the faster I'm trying to push this helicopter, you know, taking it over its limits to feel like the rivets are going to pop out of the airframe, trying to get these guys back to hospitals and stuff. And begging the Lord on the way back, you know, please let these guys live.
When my mother was dying, I leaned down and I told her and promised her that I would find the answers for the rest of us to know. And when you make a promise to your mother and she dies a few minutes after that, you just will continue until I can no longer do it or I get the answers that the family deserves.
At that time, enlisted men would call the officers pigs.
That's good.
So I had Mama Son write oink on the back of my cap. And my door gunners loved it. They just love seeing this stuff here, you know. Things like this are like therapy sessions. I can talk about it now because I know that I didn't talk about it in the beginning for the first 7 or 8 years after coming home, and buddy, it comes out of you like some kind of poison or something, or some kind of animal that's inside of you is crawling out of you. It's going to come out.
It's this handsome fella.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
In my handsome days.
Aww.
Therapy is a slow thing, and I still go to it. Like I say, I'm honestly going 6 to 8 times a month for PTSD. It's very powerful. I'm a useful citizen and everything now. It's from therapy.
If you're just joining us, I'm Carolyn Donaldson. This is Conversations Live, A Time to Heal. Let's meet our guests now here to discuss the impact of the Vietnam War on their own lives. Deborah Berger lives in Bellefonte, Centre County. Her brother, Louis P. Smith II, was shot down in Laos in 1968 and is considered missing in action. Ron Curtis lives in Bedford and was a medevac helicopter pilot in Vietnam from 1970 to 1972. And again, Dr. Stephanie Fredman is with us, a licensed clinical psychologist and assistant professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Penn State. Our telephone number, 1-800-543-8242. Our guests are ready to take your phone calls. If you prefer to email us, again, the address connect@wpsu.org, and you can tweet your questions or comments using the hashtag WPSU Conversations. We've had a number of calls come in. I do want to mention real quickly that Keith, we understand your call was dropped. Unfortunately, if you are still watching, please call back. We'd like to get to your question. And we have a number of people on the line right now. So I'll be very quick and introduce. First of all, I'd like to go ahead and ask Darla from Berlin to just comment. I understand she has a very quick comment. Darla? I believe. Oh, we lost Darla. I think she was there to thank the veterans and applaud our efforts here tonight and thank all of those who served. So thank you, Darla, for that. Now, let's start with Deborah. Powerful story. You were a loved one. You're still searching, and you have an important day tomorrow.
Correct. Yeah, tomorrow is National POW MIA Recognition Day. It was started back in the 80s, and it continues. And right here on the Penn State campus tomorrow afternoon, starting at 4 o'clock, our ROTC will start their 24-hour vigil. They will also, it will make the debut of the POW-MIA chair that will be traveling around to different venues throughout the Penn State campus, and it will be at the Wall that is here in October. But tomorrow it actually makes its debut, and that is at the Old Main.
How important is it for you, having a loved one, and you're still searching for answers, to have this kind of recognition in these types of days and this discussion?
Well, it just helps to keep the issue alive, because that is one of our main concerns, that we can't let this, this issue die. And I say it also, it kind of helps the family, because for a lot of these things, sometimes we come together. When my husband and I go down to our national family meetings in Washington, you're in a group, and just like they said with the veterans, you're in a group that everybody is in the same situation. So you kind of get a lot of feedback and camaraderie from that.
Okay. I want to get to Ron's story in just a minute, but Darla from Berlin is back now. Let's hear from Darla.
Yes, madam. I want to report that my grandfathers both were in World War I. I respect anybody that wears a uniform, no matter the branch of service, no matter the time of service, as long as I respect them for keeping me and mine free. I respect everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from.
Very powerful, Darla. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as we take a look at one of those folks who did protect our freedom, Ron Curtis, your story has been so powerful, and yet you were so open and vulnerable in sharing your story. Why have you been able to share this with us, Ron?
Well, with PTSD, what I found was that blocking things out like I had done when I came home, I never told my family the truth about what was happening to me in Vietnam. I figured it was better for them if I just came home, you know, or they got the letter one day, other than having to hear that getting shot down or getting shot at or what was happening. So I just wrote things like, it's like flight school, or, you know, there's not much happening here, the war is winding down and stuff. I couldn't tell them the truth. So I came home and I wound up blocking that stuff out, or trying to, and it took about 8 or 9 years, and it started coming out of me. And I felt like I just needed to talk. I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown, because I thought I was this combat-tested pilot. I could handle anything. It turns out I couldn't handle anything. I was just getting angry about things, and really getting turned upside down. And I actually went to the VA and said, I feel like I need to talk. I didn't know what to talk about, but I feel like I need to talk. And I told them I was a hardcore drug addict at that time, self-medicating to the point of almost suicide. And they just didn't have the help at that time, but it was just too early. It's not the same VA now, so they do have help for PTSD. And I've been through tons of therapy and still go to it. I still need it. I can't get everything to go away, and even at happiest times in my life, I still will have nightmares and things. But the thing with it all is, the key to it for me is to talk about it, and be open about it, not try to block that stuff out and say, oh, I'm not going to talk about that part. I'm not going to talk about Vietnam if somebody asks me a question. No, I'll talk about it, because the more I get it out of me, the less I carry around with me.
Right, and you're not alone. You're certainly not alone, as we're hearing from the calls tonight. And Dr. Fredman, you've talked about the improvements in that type of therapy and the couples, because it's not just the Vietnam veteran who is suffering through all this, right?
Right. And with the Vietnam veterans coming back, there was kind of increasing recognition that it was not just the veterans who were being touched by the effects of the trauma, but also the family members. And so there's been increasing recognition both within the Veterans Administration and the Department of Defense that involving family members can be a really powerful tool for helping veterans and service members recover from PTSD.
Great. Want to get to more from Deborah here, but we do have John from Spring Mills calling in tonight. John, your question or comment?
I just wanted to comment that I was there at 69, 70 in Fubai, and we had radar and ammunition support from Dang to the DMZ. And it was 20 years after I got back before I even mentioned I was over there, any of my family. And I have 11 brothers and sisters. Wow. And probably half of them still don't know that I was over there. And it just, it eats at you. And I think the worst thing is having flashbacks when you're driving down the highway and you have to pull off the highway to pull it and, just get over it.
Wow.
I just had to get that out.
Well, John, you're brave to call in tonight, and I see Ron echoing some of that, right? I mean, this is a brother.
God, yes. Yes. John, I saw an animal one time, a small cat trying to crawl off the side of the road there. I guess it had been hit before I came up, and it put me right back into a flashback of some of the wounded grunts in the back of the chopper. It seems to be a thing that they get up and try to crawl or something. I think they're in shock and whatnot, but we saw that happen. The door gunners would have to pull them back in and get them to lay down. I mean, they didn't know what they were doing, but I've had flashbacks. Just that you never know when they're coming. I try to get as much therapy as I can. I try to have a solid base to work from when something like that does happen. If you're feeling anything, if you'd like to talk, you can't talk to your family. If you'd like to talk to someone, though, and help yourself, please go to your Altoona VA. The behavioral health team down there is just great, and but there is help. There is help. You don't have to just suffer through it. You can go talk about things like your flashbacks and stuff. It will help you.
I do want to mention, too, that we are working with the Altoona Van Zant VA Medical Center, and even during our Traveling Wall exhibit, which will be in early October, we do plan to have counselors there at the site of the wall that will be there for you, and we have the toll-free numbers, and we have them available, again, through all of our resources here at WPSU. Deborah, back to your question, being the loved one still waiting for answers and having your brother and that dying wish that was easier said than done now, right? How many years later? Bring us up to speed, if you would, on the complications that have existed in your own search for answers.
Well, being that Lois was shot down in Laos, it's a little bit different to work with them. They were not real receptive at first. There's been problems with trying to get helicopters in, and where we are currently, in 2001, they went in and they found my brother's crash site, and he was put on an excavation list at that time. And then every year when they go back over to Laos, they give to the Laotians, we would like to go in and excavate these particular sites. The Laotians say yes or no to them. So his just would keep repeating itself and just coming up to it. Fast forward up to 2009, his Penn State class ring was recovered. There was the story that came out was that there was a Laotian in a prison camp that was talking to a Thai national and said he had this class ring that was taken off of a soldier that had crashed, and he came upon it. The gentleman was in the aircraft, and he buried him at the crash site. So the Thai national supposedly convinced the Laotian that humanitarian-wise, you should turn it over to the family. Well, it went on, and this went on for years, which I did not realize until I got all of the reports back, that it was, the Laotian actually had gone to the government and he wanted $1 million reward for the ring. And of course, the government wasn't going to do that, but it ended up coming back to us in 2009. And it's one of those circumstances that a lot of people will say to you, why do you continue with this? Because the government had said when they were in 2001, they found part of his flak jacket, part of his revolver. At that point, they said, yes, they felt he died on impact. When the class ring came out, then this kind of substantiated that yeah, the gentleman said he buried him there. My head tells me that's what I'm supposed to believe. My heart tells me, how do I know that Louis was not in that prison camp and he gave him this class ring to get that word out to us? So I have to continue to fight, not only for my mother, but to make sure he gets back here where he belongs and that we have closure for this. In 2010, after the class ring came back, my sister Georgette and her husband, we went down to Durham, North Carolina, and we had a family update meeting. At that time, they told us that the excavation had been put on high priority. We thought it was because the class ring had come out. What I found out later is that they actually, the Vietnamese and the Laotians, were building a reservoir right close to where the crash site was. So our government wanted to get in and get get everything excavated to try to find his remains before that would get impacted. Well, in 2015, the government received information from the engineers at that reservoir that the water would not impact his crash site, so he got lowered down, and it was not on a high priority list. They went into the crash site in May of that year and found out that his crash site was half underwater.
Oh.
So that was 2015. We are at that point right now. That year they told us it would probably be 2017 till they actually could get into the crash site and start the excavation. They had me talk to an underwater expert, and he felt sure that, if the remains were there, they would be able to find them. The government has decided to do the land half of it first, and if they find no remains, then they'll do the underwater excavation. So when we went last year in 2016, my husband and I were told that it probably wasn't going to happen until 2019, that they have to build a road to be able to get all of the trucks and the equipment in to be able to do the land excavation. So right now we're at 2019 before they possibly could go in.
What a roller coaster, Deborah, and to just continue that, again, all for closure, to have that sense of purpose that you continue that fight.
Yes.
That's unbelievable. Unbelievable. We have another caller. If I can take Jean from State College. Jean, you're on our call?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, please.
I was just wondering if any of these veterans have heard of any instance which might be similar to that of my cousin. He went to Vietnam. He was a very staid man, very straight arrow. Came back to a wife and 2 young children. He stayed about a month, and then he just took off. He just took off. No one heard from him for about 3 or 4 years. Then his mother got a telephone call from him, so we knew he was alive, but no one ever heard from him again. His parents died never having heard from him again. I'm just wondering if that happened to anyone else.
Gene, it hasn't happened to me. I have lost some friends that came back from Vietnam, and I mean, I came close to going off the deep end myself. There's no telling. There's no telling what he saw, what happened to him in Vietnam. But it happens. It happens. Some people just drop out of society and don't come back. I hope that he's okay. It's terrible about what your family had to go through with that. Victims of Vietnam in their own right.
Absolutely, the family impact. We just received this by email, so if I could share this and get your comments. Ellen writes, I've met many Vietnam veterans and have always wanted them to open up and share with me what they went through, but I was afraid I might have been opening a Pandora's box. I've always cared and felt the veterans shouldn't keep things bottled up, and there are many of us that would love to listen. So please don't say or think that no one cares. We love all of you, and when we say thank you for all you do, we mean it. This is just a civilian writing in, and I think many of us who have been watching this film, and myself included, feel that way. Is this helping to hear those kind of words and those responses today, Ron?
It's something. It's humbling. It's very humbling when you're not used to it, and to see all the work that's been put into this, and with a focus about PTSD out of the whole documentary. That not keeping it bottled up, I mean, that's the key to it. That from what I've seen, I kept it bottled up too long, and it does come out. But when it does, fortunately, I started talking.
Right, right.
One thing I was just going to add, this I'm really touched by this email and a lot of the calls of people who are expressing their support for our veterans, is that it's less important for people to disclose sights and sounds and smells, the specifics of the event, but to be able to disclose how you've made sense of your experiences and how it's affected you. And being able to share that to somebody who receives it well is actually therapeutic. We know that actually is one of the things that can help people get better, because it helps them be able to have a story about their experiences that makes sense to them. And that can be part of the key for helping to unlock PTSD and promote people's recovery. So that can be loved ones who are willing to listen about, you know, how you feel about it, but also just people in the community who are showing that support. It's really important.
And Deborah, I know in your community, you've got just such a wealth of support, right? I mean, the banners are flying in your hometown for your loved ones.
Right, right.
And how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, we had the year that the banners went up, we also dedicated Veterans Bridge in there, and we actually had the Vietnam veterans be the grand marshals of the parade that we had. And I had so many of them, after that parade was over, come up and say, you know, I didn't think I wanted to do this, but Buddy said, come. You know, come on, let's go do that. And they said the feeling they got coming down the streets of Bellefonte, because we had the Bellefonte football team actually handed out little flags to everybody at the side of the road. So when the veterans came down, all the people stood up and they were waving the flags and just greeting them. And they said that was the welcome they never got when they came home. So I had so many people come up and thank me, and I got cards, and I had some of the Vietnam veterans sent me pictures of themselves when they were in Vietnam. They just were so, they felt like they could come out, that they could then talk about this. And I had one gentleman come up and he said, are we going to do this again?
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it really, it makes a difference if your communities get behind these people and you do these things. We are going to have another dedication this November 11th in Bellefonte of another set of Hometown Hero banners. And so we're going to have even more of them flying through town. So it does help. I think it helps the veterans to know people are behind them.
And when we look at the title of this documentary, Is It a Time to Heal? I think we're coming back full circle to kind of having that sense of closure. We just have a few minutes left in this broadcast, but again, the conversation will continue. I do want to mention that we're, you know, rolling out many more parts of this program, and so we can't thank all of you that have called in, and we won't get to everyone's call, but because we just have a minute or so left, can you summarize maybe going forward, Stephanie, what is that hope for the treatment? I mean, there are good things on the horizon, right? And there's people like Ron that are speaking out and talking.
Right, we're always continuing to innovate, and that even if someone has been suffering from PTSD and the families have been suffering from the effects of PTSD, even for 40 or 50 years from Vietnam, I truly believe it is never too late to heal and to recover.
And Ron, living proof?
Well, I always hope that someone will see a documentary or something like this and go get help. Someone that's hurting will possibly go get help. It's there at the VA and now, and I hope everyone will take advantage of it.
And everyone who's had different voices in our documentary and different parts of the conversation all have stories to share. right? They all have different points of interest. And tomorrow's dedication, the recognition day, the fight continues for you and your family and those who have been on this roller coaster for
Absolutely,
a long time.
absolutely. Won't stop till we get all of them that we can accounted for.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask this, and we don't have a lot of time, but Ron, you look at this and we have to say, you know, was it worth it? Your service, going through what we did. Are you able to?
That's a tough question. What I saw as a chopper pilot with the wounded and getting to see so much of the war. I wasn't just in one hellhole in one place. I mean, every day you're flying all over the place, carrying different troops. My answer is no. And what I saw with the South Vietnamese people and the way we were forced to fight the war, sadly, no. No.
We have so many more stories to share, and we'd love to have this conversation continue. I can't thank you enough tonight, all of our guests, Frank Christopher, Lou Frank, Dr. Stephanie Fredman, Deborah Berger, Ron Curtis, all of you who called in and shared your comments and your interest in our program. The talks continue. Find us on atimetoheal.wpsu.org. I'm Carolyn Donaldson, and for all of us here at WPSU, we thank you very much for joining us in this Conversations Live. Good night.